In the Dominican Republic, people took to the streets to protest against the increase in the prices of the basic food basket and fuel, with more mobilizations called for March 1st and the 2nd. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that a U.S. Navy Virginia-type submarine was detected on Saturday in Russian territorial waters. Canadian police cleared the trucker protests at the border crossing between Canada and the United States. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. In the Dominican Republic, people took to the streets to protest against the increase in the prices of the basic food basket and also the fuel. The Broad Front called for a nationwide mobilization on March 1st and the 2nd. Demonstrations have been registered with burning tires in the streets and roadblocks, following the call made by the spokesperson of the Dominican opposition for a 48-hour strike in San Francisco de Macorís. The Minister of the Interior and Police, Jesus Vázquez, denied the mobilizations were serious events and also said they were financed by the opposition and did not pursue any social demands. Ecuadorian educators mobilized in different cities of the country to demand a salary increase and the possibility of retiring after 30 years of service. Protests were held in 17 of the 24 provinces of the day of the Constitutional Court gave the executive branch a 6-month deadline to present a report on the budget impact on the demand for the teachers. According to the National Union of Educators, teachers' salaries have been frozen for years with the argument that there are no funds to increase them, while at the same time they point to salary increases for members of the National Police Force. The main demonstration took place in Quito, where educators gathered in the afternoon outside the Ecuadorian Institute of Social Security to begin their march towards the historic center of the country. In Haiti, Judge Chevans Etienne resigned from his post after being appointed to investigate the assassination of former President Jovenel Moïse, becoming the 4th judge to decline the case. The government commissioner at the Court of First Instance in Port-au-Prince confirmed the resignation of Judge Etienne and specified that in order to properly investigate the case, it is necessary to demand the extradition to Haiti of all suspects in prison abroad, particularly in the United States. Etienne withdrew from the case, arguing personal reasons, less than a week after his appointment after succeeding Judge Gary Aurelien last week, when he later was denied the extension requested to extend the time of investigation. And the violence against press workers in Mexico continues. This Friday, family and friends of Heber Lopez, journalist and director of the portal Noticias Web, mourned his death after he was shot in the Mexican state of Oaxaca. According to prosecutors, Lopez was shot dead by 2 men who waited for him outside his office on Thursday. The 2 suspects were later detained by officials who recovered a weapon from them, although there is still no information on the motive of the killing. The Mexican state has expressed his concern over the attacks on the media workers, which according to the Attorney General's office have claimed the lives of 5 journalists so far this year.
We demand justice to the federal and state agencies because we, the journalists, need to have the guarantees in order to work. What happened to Heber, what did they do to him in front of his family is very complicated because he didn't deserve this and neither do we. We're not accusing anyone, we're just asking the prosecutor to identify those who participated in this crime with all of the consequences.
In Venezuela, a march to commemorate the 208th anniversary of the Day of the Youth is underway to honor the sacrifice of the young people who brought about the victory of independence forces under the command of José Félix Rivas on 12 February 1814. The invitation was made by the first Vice President of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, Diosdado Cabello, who invited young people to take part in the march to commemorate the anniversary of the Battle of La Victoria. According to the political leader, the march starts from the wall of Petare and will reach the center of the city of Caracas, the capital of the country. In this sense, Pedro Infante, the vice president of the mobilization and events of the Socialist Party, announced that Nicolás Maduro is expected to participate. The Fundamental Rights Commission of the Chilean Constitutional Convention approved by a large majority an initiative for the restitution and duty to return lands, territories, and natural assets to indigenous peoples. The Commission agreed to the creation of a special court for ancestral lands, territories, and waters, which will have to promote all necessary measures for the restitution of lands, including expropriation to indigenous peoples. The proposal considers the creation of a plurinational commission whose purpose will be to receive the demands of the native nations. It will also have to carry out a register of properties that are in the domain of third parties, private individuals, or the Treasury. In this way, it will be able to draw up a concrete plan for demarcation, registration, or title and/or restitution as appropriate. And this Saturday, February 12th, is the 38th anniversary of the death of the Argentine writer Julio Cortázar, considered one of the most innovative and original authors of this time. Cortázar was born on August 26, 1914 in Ixelles, a district in the south of the city of Brussels, capital of Belgium, and died on February 12, 1984 of leukemia. He was a master of the story, poetic prose, and the short story in general. In his legacy, he left 7 important novels which introduced a new wave of writing literature in the Hispanic world because they broke the classic patterns by means of narratives that escape from the temporal linearity, among which we can highlight with excellence Rayuela, written in 1963 and with which he created a particular style of reading and multiple interpretations, and the story titled Un tal Lucas, published in 1979. Let's listen to a fragment of this writing.
Somewhere there must be a garbage dump where explanations are piled up. Only one thing worries in this fair scenario. What might happen the day someone manages to explain the garbage dump?
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. In Uruguay, after 2 years, the opening parade of the cults took place again.
The magic of the drums once again took to the streets of Montevideo. After 2 years of absence, the opening parade of the cults could run normally. From the early morning, the Uruguayans went to Isla de Flores street to enjoy a night full of drums.
We have the Great Candle Festival. They are the Colts, the official Colts parade where we perform the Afro-Uruguayan culture that represents us in the world. We come from 2 years of pandemic, stationary, unable to carry out our activity. Last year we could not have the parade, the event, and luckily we come back to the Island of Flowers. The weather was good, and today the party begins for us.
The parade of comparsas, the candombe, takes place in the first days of February and attracts thousands of people all over the country. This year, due to the health situation, it had a limited capacity, but the rhythms was contagious from the beginning. This is the party that all Uruguayans have, the carnival, the candombe, when we go out with the old mama, the gramillero, the drums, and we really enjoy it of what is typical, rooted like in other countries. This is our thing, to live it, to enjoy it, to dance it, to enjoy it, and to have fun with the most beautiful thing there is in the people. The beating of the drums, the dances, and the color were applauded by a crowd that overflowed with joy and came from all the neighborhoods of Montevideo to join the party. Look, I am from El Cerro, and I go out in the Templando from Puerto Rico. Tomorrow I come to cheer the comparsa del Cerro, because I saw the people up with the people always there, supporting the neighborhood, supporting the culture that is the greatest thing we have. The opening parade of a call is an official contest where the best candombe group is awarded by the evaluation of 3 categories: drumming, dance, and movement, and aesthetic design and execution. The winners will be announced in a few hours. More than 50 comparsas will parade between today and tomorrow along this street, Isla de Flores, which runs through the southern and Palermo neighborhoods in Montevideo. The candombe party is back on the streets of Uruguay.
Mateo Brille, teleSUR, Montevideo, Uruguay.
Thank you, Mateo, for this report. And now we move on to other topics. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced that a U.S. Navy Virginia-type submarine was detected on Saturday in Russian territorial waters. Moscow warned that a U.S. nuclear submarine was spotted near the Kuril Islands, where it was intersected by the Russian Pacific Fleet Brigade Marshal Shaponishkov, which used appropriate means against the submersible. The Russian vessel warned the U.S. submarine in both Russian and English that it had penetrated Russian territorial waters, but its warning ignored. Following this, the submarine used a self-propelled simulator to duplicate its signal on radar and acoustic controls and left the Russian territorial waters at maximum speed. After the incident, the U.S. military attaché in Moscow was summoned before the authorities, while it is believed that the submarine was intended to spy on naval maneuvers. Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke by telephone on Saturday with his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden amid escalating tensions over Ukraine. Both heads of state spoke for 1 hour in a bid to defuse the crisis over Ukraine, while the U.S. State Department ordered all but a core team of its diplomats and employees to leave the American embassy in Kiev over fears that Moscow allegedly will soon mount a major assault. Even after the calls between the top U.S. and Russian diplomats and between the country's defense secretaries, the path to a diplomatic resolution to the standoff appeared to be narrowing. The United States on Saturday ordered all non-emergency Kiev embassy staff to leave because of the alleged threat of Russia invading Ukraine. The advisory also repeated an earlier call by U.S. President Joe Biden for Americans to leave Ukraine. A number of countries, including the United Kingdom, have followed suit. In an updated travel advisory, the U.S. State Department issued the order for most U.S. direct hire employees from the embassy in Kiev. It also added that a small consular presence will be maintained in western Ukraine to handle emergencies. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has accused the U.S. of seeking to provoke conflict in Ukraine and accused Washington of waging a propaganda campaign against Moscow in a phone call with the U.S. counterpart Anthony Blinken. Meanwhile, Ukraine's foreign ministry appealed for calm and not to cause alarm after the United States warned of a possible Russian invasion next week. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry issued a statement in which it calls for avoiding actions that undermine stability and create panic in the country. It also stressed that they have been doing everything possible to keep Ukraine stable and ready for various scenarios, as well as any aggressive intentions against our state. The statement comes after the United States, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Norway, and Denmark call on their citizens to leave Ukraine in the next few hours. Turkmenistan will hold early presidential elections on March 12th after the country's president called for a generational change. According to the Interfax agency, President Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov, in power since 2006, ordered the Central Election Commission to start preparing for the elections. The next regular elections were to be held in 2024, but on Friday, the head of state announced at a meeting of the People's Council, the upper house of parliament, his intention to transfer his post to a young leader. The president of Turkmenistan is elected directly by the Turkmen people and holds office for a 7-year term. Now we address other topics. Experts assure that Portugal is experiencing one of its worst droughts in the last 20 years. According to experts heard at the last meeting of the Permanent Commission for the Prevention, Surveillance and Monitoring of the Effects of Drought, the year 2022 is on track to be another dry year, with an 80% probability. The situation has generated that water reservoirs in the center of the country are drying up in plain sight, which worries farmers and local residents. In this context, the governments of Spain and Portugal have analyzed the current scenario of water scarcity and have agreed to strengthen their cooperation for the management of hydrographic basins.
The water reserves have decreased by 20% in the last 20 years. So every time we have a drought, depending on its intensity and duration, the situation only gets worse. At the level of the Iberian Peninsula, it is very important that both Portugal and Spain are fully aware of the impact of these climatic changes, and especially regarding the problem of water management. Several studies indicate that water management will be the next problem facing mankind.
We'll take a final short break. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. Canadian police were present on Saturday where protesters were gathered at a border crossing between Canada and the United States. The tense standoff at the border crossing, crucial to both countries' economies, appeared to be dissolving peacefully as Canadian police moved in to disperse the nearly week-long blockade and demonstrators began leaving without resistance. Many demonstrators drove away from the Ambassador Bridge, spanning the river between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario, as scores of police approached shortly after dawn. They had spent the night there in defiance of new warnings to end the blockade, which disrupted the flow of traffic and goods and forced the auto industry on both sides to roll back production. The six-day demonstration aimed at protesting against Canada's COVID-19 mandates and restrictions. Paris police intercepted at least 500 vehicles attempting to enter the French capital on Saturday, in defiance of a police order to take part in protests against virus restrictions inspired by Canada's horn-honking Freedom Convoy. The police said on Twitter that several convoys were stopped from entering at key cities' arteries, and over 200 motorists were handed tickets. Around 7,000 officers have been mobilized for the weekend protests. So far, the police blockade action has seemed effective. Waving French flags and shouting freedom, the protesters organized online, inspired in part by truckers who have blockaded Canada's capital and blockaded other crossings. The French action has no single leader or goal and comes as months of protests against French government vaccination rules have been waning. Hundreds of Cypriots from different towns gather in the capital Nicosia to demonstrate against COVID-19 measures and vaccines enforced by the government. The Cyprus Freedom Convoy, inspired by self-styled convoys against COVID rules that started in Canada and spread elsewhere, was held to send a message to the government asking to end all mandates and COVID-19 related restrictions. Riot police was protecting the areas as demonstrators increased in numbers. Norway is lifting almost all COVID-19 restrictions, seeing the consequences of measures worse than the virus. This measure comes despite Omicron infections spreading in the Nordic nation. Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre justified the move by saying that Norwegians are well protected by vaccines against the COVID-19 pandemic, and the proportion of citizens who end up in hospital has remained low despite the spread of the Omicron variant. As of Saturday, Norwegians are no longer required to wear masks in crowded places, and the 2 meters distancing rule is abolished. In addition, self-isolation requirement is lifted and replaced with a recommendation that infected adults stay at home for 4 days.
We're removing these measures now effective from 10 a.m. So all that I have said applies immediately. And we can do this for 4 main reasons. The Omicron variant of the virus is not proving as severe as disease as previous variants of COVID-19. Although infections are on the rise, the proportion ending up in hospital is down. Third, we are all well protected by vaccines. And fourth, even if infections are high and there is lots of sick leave, it is largely manageable. The consequences of the measures have become more negative than the consequences of the infection, and therefore we now remove almost every one of them.
Venezuela received a donation of 17 tons of medical supplies from Belarus. The shipment arrived after the Eastern European Nations Council of Ministers instructed its Ministry of Health to ensure the delivery of medicines to the South American nation to support the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. The donation included face masks, surgical overalls, special footwear, and disposable protective gear. The of Belarus in Venezuela, Andrei Molchan, emphasized that both countries maintain good bilateral relations of mutual benefit. In the meantime, the Vice President of the Council of Ministers of Planning of Venezuelan government, Ricardo Menendez, pointed out the contribution in kind constituted a sign of solidarity and cooperation between the two countries in times of the pandemic. On the 75th anniversary of the Union Day in Myanmar, its military junta announced that it will release over 800 prisoners from its jails on Saturday. According to the United Nations Human Rights Office, the country has been in turmoil since last year's coup, with mass protests and a subsequent military crackdown that has killed more than 1,000 civilians. In a customary gesture for national holidays, the head of the military council that seized power last year announced an amnesty for the prisoners, but it was unclear how many political detainees were among those freed. Those given an amnesty will be mostly from prisons in Yangon. As of Friday, the government was keeping around 9,000 people under detention, according to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners.
My son was arrested on September 14, 2021, and he arrived in prison around the end of October. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison for incitement against the military. I don't know if he will be released today or not, but I just came here and I'm waiting outside.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.